What if the story of humanity is not a linear march from primitive hunter to modern urbanite, but a cyclical rhythm of rise and cataclysm, where ages of brilliance are periodically scrubbed from the slate of the earth, leaving behind only the faintest, most enigmatic of echoes? What if we are not the first to build, to chart the stars, to ponder our origins, but merely the latest to do so, living our brief lives atop the buried ruins of forgotten empires whose names are lost even to dust? The conventional narrative of civilization, beginning at Sumer a mere 6,000 years ago, is a comforting and tidy story. But it is a story written on the very top layer of an unimaginably deep archaeological record, a record that holds whispers of a past far more strange and profound. Tonight on Slumber Expeditions, we will investigate the architectural marvels that defy conventional timelines, the ancient cartography that hints at lost knowledge, and the global flood myths that echo a real geological trauma. This journey will challenge the linear narrative of human progress, proposing instead a deep history punctuated by cataclysmic resets. So before you settle in, if you're finding comfort in these explorations of deep time and lost history, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. But only if you genuinely like what we do here. We would also love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us where you are listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to connect with a global community of curious minds who share this fascination with humanity's forgotten prologue. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's speculative journey together. You are standing at the edge of the Göbekli Tepe excavation site in southeastern Anatolia. The sun is high and hot, baking the arid plains. But before you is not a simple mound. It is a series of concentric, circular structures carved from massive, multi-ton blocks of limestone. This place, dated to a staggering 9,600 BCE, is a profound anomaly that forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the dawn of civilization. The scale and sophistication of Göbekli Tepe are what first strike the observer. The largest of the T-shaped limestone pillars stand over 18 feet tall and weigh an estimated 16 tons. They were quarried from a nearby bedrock plateau, shaped with stone tools, and transported over a quarter of a mile to the site, a logistical feat that implies a level of social organization and technical skill previously deemed impossible for pre-agricultural societies. But it is the artistry that truly confounds. The pillars are not blank monoliths. They are masterfully carved with a rich and complex iconography. A menagerie of animals, foxes, gazelles, scorpions, vultures, and lions, is rendered in high relief, their forms dynamic and precise. These are not crude doodles. They are symbolic representations, a complex language in stone whose meaning is lost to us. The creators of Göbekli Tepe were not simple hunter-gatherers on the brink of survival. They were a society with a shared worldview, a specialized labor force, and artists capable of executing a grand, visionary project. This was a temple complex, a place of gathering and ritual that predates the invention of pottery, writing, and the wheel by millennia. Its very existence suggests that the impulse to build monumental architecture, to create complex symbolic art, and to organize large-scale communal projects may have preceded the development of settled agriculture, turning the standard model of cultural evolution on its head. The mystery deepens when we consider the fate of Göbekli Tepe. After centuries of use, around 8000 BCE, the entire complex was deliberately and carefully buried. It was not destroyed in a conflict or abandoned to decay. It was filled with hundreds of tons of earth, stone, and animal bones, effectively entombing it. This was a conscious act of preservation, a ritual closing that protected the site for thousands of years until its rediscovery. Why would a culture go to such lengths to inter its most sacred site? One compelling theory is that it represents a profound cultural shift. The world was changing. The climate was stabilizing after the tumultuous Younger Dryas period, and agriculture was beginning to take hold. Perhaps the old ways, the hunter-gatherer worldview symbolized by Göbekli Tepe, were being replaced by a new, more sedentary lifestyle. Burying the temple could have been a way to honor the old gods while moving on, sealing a chapter of their history. This single site presents two monumental puzzles: its construction by a supposedly primitive society, and its deliberate interment by their descendants. It stands as a silent, stone question mark at the very foundation of our history. Göbekli Tepe is not an isolated incident. It is part of a growing pattern of archaeological discoveries that push back the timeline of complex human activity. In present-day Turkey, the site of Çatalhöyük, a vast Neolithic proto-city, flourished just a millennium after Göbekli Tepe was buried. Its inhabitants lived in a dense honeycomb of mud brick houses, decorated with elaborate wall paintings and bull skulls, and practiced an early form of agriculture. While less architecturally staggering than Göbekli Tepe, Çatalhöyük demonstrates a rapid development towards urban living, suggesting the foundations for this transition were laid much earlier and elsewhere. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the Norte Chico civilization in Peru was building its own complex of pyramidal structures and large circular plazas around 3000 BCE, contemporaneous with the early dynasties of Egypt. The Souq Valley sites, such as Caral, feature massive platform mounds, sunken circular courts, and evidence of extensive trade networks. The simultaneous, yet independent, emergence of such complex societies in disconnected parts of the globe hints at a deeper, shared trigger or a common, but now lost, ancestral knowledge that seeded these developments. This pattern of older-than-expected complexity forces us to confront the limitations of the archaeological record. Civilization, as we define it, requires specific conditions to leave a trace: durable materials, concentrated settlements, and a stable environment for preservation. What if an earlier civilization existed, but did not build primarily in stone? What if its major population centers were not in the river valleys we have exhaustively studied, but on the now submerged continental shelves? The end of the last ice age was not a gentle transition. As the massive glaciers retreated, sea levels rose by nearly 400 feet, inundating millions of square miles of coastal land that had been prime territory for human habitation. Any settlements, any cultural centers built in these coastal zones would have been utterly erased by the rising waters, their remains now scattered and buried under centuries of marine sediment. The evidence for the true cradle of civilization may not be in Mesopotamia or the Nile Valley, but lying at the bottom of the Persian Gulf, the Mediterranean, or the Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia. Göbekli Tepe and its sister sites, then, are not the beginnings, but the inland survivors, the refugee communities who carried the embers of a much older, coastal culture into the New World, where they would eventually kindle the flames of the civilizations we recognize today. The notion of a lost, seafaring civilization is given its most tantalizing form not in stone, but in ink and parchment. Scattered throughout the world's great libraries and collections are ancient and medieval maps that depict geographical knowledge which should not have existed at the time of their creation. These are not mere curiosities, they are potential fragments of a much older worldview, a cartographic inheritance from a forgotten age of exploration. The most famous of these is the Piri Reis map of 1513. Drawn by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis, The map fragment that survives shows the western coasts of Europe and Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and, most controversially, the northern coastline of Antarctica. In his own notes, Rees stated he had compiled his work from 20 source maps, some dating back to the 4th century BCE or earlier, including one drawn by Christopher Columbus. The depiction of Antarctica is the central mystery. The continent was not officially discovered until 1820. Furthermore, the coastline on the Piri-Reis map does not match the current icy outline of the continent. Instead, it bears a startling resemblance to the subglacial topography of Queen Maud Land, the actual shape of the bedrock buried beneath miles of ice. This topography was completely unknown to modern science until the mid-20th century, when seismic and radar surveys finally mapped the land beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. The correlation is too precise to be easily dismissed as coincidence or fantasy. It suggests that Rees's source maps were based on surveys of Antarctica conducted at a time when its coasts were ice-free and navigable, a condition that last existed millions of years ago, or at the very least, during a warm period in the distant Pleistocene, long before any known human civilization. The Piri-Reis map is not an isolated phantom. It belongs to a family of documents known as portolan charts, renowned for their stunningly accurate depictions of coastlines and Mediterranean sailing directions. The Orontius Phineas World Map of 1531 provides an even more detailed and recognizable depiction of Antarctica. It shows rivers, bays, and mountain ranges, and presents the continent not as a solid landmass, but with a large, ice-free inland sea. This corresponds almost exactly with the subglacial geography that we now know divides Antarctica into eastern and western components, with the Gamburtsev mountain range resembling the depicted mountains. Similarly, the Bloch map of 1737, created by the French geographer Philippe Bloch, shows a clear channel separating Antarctica into two large landmasses. Bloch claimed to have synthesized his map from even older source charts. The consistency between these independently created maps, separated by centuries, points to a common source of ancient geographical knowledge that was being copied, translated, and slowly corrupted over time, but which retained the core, accurate memory of a continent that had been lost to ice for millennia. If we accept the possibility that these maps are fragments of a much older global survey, we must ask, who could have created the originals? This hypothetical civilization would have needed advanced seafaring capabilities, including shipbuilding technology robust enough to navigate the Southern Ocean and the methodological rigor to create accurate cartographic projections. More importantly, they would have had to exist during a period when Antarctica's coasts were possible. Geological evidence suggests that the Antarctic ice sheet began its current formation around 34 million years ago, but has undergone significant periods of advance and retreat. The last time any significant portion of the coast was ice-free was likely during an interglacial period over 100,000 years ago, a time when Homo sapiens was just beginning its journey out of Africa. This timeline seems impossibly remote. However, a less extreme possibility is that the source maps date from a period around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, when the climate was warming rapidly. While the interior of Antarctica would have remained glaciated, the coastal fringes could have been tempered enough to support some vegetation and, crucially, to be surveyed by a determined maritime culture. The maps may not show a fully habitable Antarctica, but its navigable coastline. This leads to the most compelling geographical evidence for a lost civilization, the drowned continental shelves. During the last glacial maximum, with so much of the Earth's water locked in ice, sea levels were about 400 feet lower. This exposed vast, fertile plains that are now submerged. The most significant of these was Sunderland, the landmass that connected the islands of Indonesia, Malaysia, and Borneo into a single continent. To the northwest, a vast landmass known as Doggerland connected the British Isles to mainland Europe, a low-lying plain rich in rivers, lakes, and game. The Persian Gulf was a fertile river valley, and the Sahul Shelf connected Australia to New Guinea. These were not marginal lands, they were the prime real estate of the Paleolithic world, offering abundant resources and easy travel along rivers and coastlines. It is on these now-drowned landscapes that we should logically expect to find the earliest and most developed human settlements. Any civilization that arose in these regions would have had its heartland completely obliterated by the rising seas in a geological instant. Their cities, their ports, their farms, all would have been swallowed by the ocean, leaving behind only those communities who had migrated to the higher ground of our current continents. The ghost maps, then, are not just charts of Antarctica. They are the last surviving echoes of a world that was a world whose most advanced cultures lived on a geography that now lies at the bottom of the sea, their story preserved only in cryptic lines on parchment and in the universal myths of a great flood. Beyond the stones and the maps lies the most pervasive evidence for a lost chapter in human history, our stories. Woven into the foundational myths of nearly every culture on Earth is a shared narrative of catastrophe, a world-destroying deluge that cleanses the Earth of a prior age of beings, leaving only a handful of survivors to repopulate the world. The sheer universality of this story, from the mountains of Mesopotamia to the islands of the Pacific, suggests it is not mere fiction, but a race memory of a real, traumatic event that shaped the psyche of all humanity. The most ancient written version comes from Sumer, in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The hero Utnapishtim is warned by the god Ea that the Council of Gods has decided to destroy mankind with a flood. He is instructed to build a great boat, to take the seed of all living things aboard, and to seal the door with bitumen. A terrifying storm rages for 6 days and 6 nights, so violent that even the gods were frightened by the deluge. When the waters subside, Utnapishtim's boat grounds on the summit of Mount Nimish. He releases a dove, a swallow, and finally a raven, which does not return, signaling that the waters have receded. The parallels to the later biblical story of Noah are unmistakable, pointing to a common source in the deep mythology of the ancient Near East. But the story is far more widespread. In India, the Shatapatha Brahmana and later the Matsya Purana tell of Manu, the first man, who is warned by the god Vishnu in the form of a fish about an impending flood. Vishnu instructs Manu to build a massive ship. When the deluge comes, Vishnu as the fish tows the ship to safety on a mountaintop, where Manu becomes the progenitor of a new humanity. This narrative is not confined to the Old World. In the Americas, the flood myth is equally potent. The Aztecs told of a world destroyed by a great flood, with only a man named Coxcoxtli and a woman named Xochiquetzal surviving by floating in a hollow cypress log. The Maya Popol Vuh describes a world created and then destroyed by a flood because the first wooden people failed to honor their creators. The Incas had the story of Viracocha, who unleashed a flood called Uno Pachacuti to wipe away a race of stone giants, sparing only 2 who had found the Inca lineage. In North America, the Choctaw people speak of a great flood that was caused by the voices of powerful beings, and the Hopi describe the sequential destruction of previous worlds, one by fire and one by ice, before the emergence of our current one. Across the Pacific, Aboriginal Australian myths tell of a dreamtime flood that shaped the landscape, while Chinese legends speak of the great engineer Yu the Great, who succeeded in controlling a universal flood that had lasted for generations. This global consistency is staggering. While the names of the gods and heroes change, the core elements remain: divine warning, abode or refuge, the destruction of the old world by water, the grounding on a mountain, and the repopulation of the earth. From a scientific perspective, this is not a coincidence. It points to a shared, cataclysmic experience so profound that it was seared into the collective human consciousness and passed down through oral tradition for hundreds of generations before being committed to writing. The most plausible geological candidate for this event is the rapid rise in sea levels at the end of the last ice age. As the massive ice sheets over North America and Eurasia melted, the release of water was not always gradual. Geological records indicate periods of catastrophic meltwater pulses. The most significant, known as Meltwater Pulse 1A, occurred around 14,500 years ago, when global sea levels rose by an estimated 60 feet in less than a century. For any human communities living on the vast, low-lying coastal plains that were then above water, places like Doggerland, Sunderland, and the Persian Gulf Valley, this would have been an apocalypse. The shoreline would have advanced miles inland within a single lifetime, swallowing ancestral homelands, hunting grounds, and sacred sites. The flood was a relentless, inescapable force, a real-world event of biblical proportions that would have necessitated a mass migration to higher ground. The flood myth, therefore, is likely the cultural echo of this post-glacial flooding. But some researchers, like the proponents of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, suggest an even more dramatic trigger. This theory posits that around 12,800 years ago, a fragmented comet or asteroid struck the Earth's atmosphere, exploding over the northern hemisphere. The immediate effects would have been firestorms and a dramatic cooling of the climate, but the secondary effects could have been even more devastating. The impact on the North American ice sheet could have triggered a massive, rapid release of meltwater into the Atlantic Ocean, disrupting global ocean currents and causing a sudden, dramatic rise in sea levels. This event, which may have lasted only a few years or decades, would have been a global catastrophe of fire and ice, followed by flood. It perfectly matches the descriptions in many myths of the world being destroyed by fire from the sky and then a great flood. This event could have been the definitive reset, wiping out any developing coastal civilizations and leaving behind only the scattered, traumatized survivors whose stories would become the flood myths we know today. The stones, the maps, and the myths are not separate puzzles. They are different pieces of the same grand, terrifying, and awe-inspiring picture, the story of a world before our own. As we conclude this part of our journey into the possibility of a lost civilization, we'd like to extend a special thank you for listening. If you're finding comfort in these explorations of deep time, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Slumber Expeditions. We would also love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to connect with our global community of curious minds. You can also share which part of the story has captivated you the most so far. It would be wonderful to start a conversation around it. Now, let the profound mystery of our planet's silent past settle in your mind as we prepare to continue our exploration. The most compelling and enduring evidence for a forgotten chapter in human history is etched into the very landscape of our planet, embodied by structures of such scale and sophistication that they stand as permanent questions mark against the conventional timeline. These are not merely old buildings. They are feats of engineering that required a profound understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and logistics, achievements that seem to belong to a different age entirely. When we examine these constructions not as historical artifacts, but as engineering projects, the gap between their attributed builders and the required skill set becomes a chasm, one that suggests the presence of a master architect's hand in the deepest layers of our past. Standing on the Giza Plateau, the Great Pyramid does not simply impress with its size, it confounds with its precision. Its alignment to the 4 cardinal points is accurate to within a fraction of a single degree, a surveying accomplishment that would challenge modern engineers. To achieve this, the builders would have needed a method for establishing true north that was both incredibly precise and consistently applicable over the pyramid's vast base area of over 13 acres. The base itself forms a near-perfect square, with sides varying by less than 0.2%. This near perfection in leveling and squaring, achieved across such a massive area, speaks of a standardized unit of measurement and a system of quality control that is more akin to a modern manufacturing plant than a Bronze Age construction site. The original casing stones, over 144,000 of them, were fashioned from highly polished Tyrol limestone and fitted together with joints so seamless that a razor blade could not slit between them. This was not merely for aesthetics. It created a smooth, near-frictionless surface that would have reflected the sun with blinding intensity, a beacon of white light in the desert. The sheer logistical effort of quarrying, shaping, transporting, and placing these stones with such perfection, one after another, represents an organizational triumph that stands in stark contrast to the image of an early Bronze Age society. The internal construction is equally baffling and pushes the boundaries of what we believe was possible. The King's Chamber is built from monolithic blocks of Aswan granite, some weighing 70 tons. These stones were quarried over 500 miles away, transported along the Nile, and then hoisted to a height of over 150 feet within the pyramid's core. The chamber itself is capped by 5 so-called relieving chambers, stacked above one another, with the uppermost capped by gigantic, gabled limestone slabs. The purpose of this complex roof structure was to divert the immense weight of the masonry above away from the chamber below, a sophisticated understanding of load distribution. The descending and ascending passages, along with the grand gallery, maintain a straightness over their length that deviates by less than 1/4 of an inch. The methods traditionally proposed, ramps of sand and brick, copper chisels, and stone pounders, feel inadequate when confronted with this relentless, millimeter-perfect execution. The precision required to maintain these alignments through the core of a structure that grew steadily around them suggests the use of a fixed, external reference system throughout the entire multi-decade construction process. The structure embodies a harmony of form and function that suggests its creation was guided by principles far beyond simple entombment. It was an exercise in applied celestial and geodetic science. This theme of impossible stonework echoes across the world. In the high Andes of Peru, where the stone speaks a different but equally complex language. The fortress of Sacsayhuaman, overlooking Cusco, is a symphony in limestone. Its walls are composed of colossal blocks, some exceeding 100 tons, fitted together in a complex, polygonal jigsaw. The stones, with their myriad angles and subtly curved faces, interlock with a precision that has withstood centuries of violent earthquakes. During a seismic event, the entire wall shifts and settles as a single, resilient entity, a feat of anti-seismic engineering that modern architects study with admiration. The largest of these stones is estimated to weigh over 120 tons, and its placement, high on a hill, required not just strength but an intuitive understanding of leverage and inertia. The surfaces of these megaliths are often smoothly polished, their edges sharp, and their fits so exact that the walls appear to have been poured rather than built. This was a technology that manipulated stone with a soft, almost fluid mastery, treating andesite and diorite as if they were a malleable substance. At Ollantaytambo, In the Sacred Valley, the challenge becomes even more pronounced and the mystery deepens. Here, in the Temple of the Sun, we find massive red porphyry blocks quarried from a mountainside called Cataclysm, located on the opposite side of the Ooparts River, over 1,000 feet below and several miles away. These blocks, some weighing between 50 and 80 tons, were transported across the turbulent river and up the steep valley side to their final position. The logistics of moving such weight across such terrain defy simple explanations of ramps and manpower. The surfaces of these stones are often marked with curious, seemingly tooled features, nubs, grooves, and striations that do not appear to be decorative. Some theorists suggest these could be lifting points or alignment marks, remnants of a lost technology for handling megaliths. The precision with which these immense porphyry blocks are joined to one another is, once again, flawless. There is no mortar, only the perfect congruence of one rock face to another, a testament to a stone masonry tradition that had achieved a level of perfection that would not be seen again. The evidence for this advanced stoneworking capability is permanently recorded in the quarries and unfinished works these cultures left behind. In Aswan, Egypt, the unfinished obelisk remains attached to the bedrock, providing a perfect snapshot of the quarrying process. It reveals that workers cut deep, straight trenches around the perimeter of the stone, creating a channel just wide enough for a person to stand in. The precision and depth of these cuts, in hard red granite, suggest the use of a method far more efficient and controlled than pounding with dolerite bowls. The obelisk itself, had it been completed, would have weighed nearly 1,200 tons, dwarfing any other known obelisk. Its abandonment due to a crack in a stone shows the immense risks involved, but the attempt itself speaks to a confidence and ambition that is staggering. In Peru, at the quarry of Cachacada, one can see perfectly cut stairways and niches carved directly into the living rock, alongside massive blocks that were partially separated with clean, geometric precision. On certain finished walls, such as those in the Coricancha in Cusco or a mysterious wall in the city of Cusco itself, there are curious, small drill holes that penetrate hard andesite. These holes are often perfectly cylindrical, of a consistent diameter, and sometimes bored at angles that would be difficult to achieve with a bow drill. They imply the use of a tool that could apply immense, focus pressure and rotate at a high speed without shattering the bit. This stone itself tells a story of a process that was methodical, powerful, and based on a knowledge of materials that allowed the builders to work with granite and diorite with an ease that remains enigmatic. These global monuments are not just testaments to human labor, they are the physical fingerprints of a lost science of construction, a science whose tools and techniques have vanished from history, leaving only their magnificent, silent results to challenge our understanding of the past. If the physical construction of these ancient sites speaks of a lost engineering prowess, their placement and orientation reveal a mind equally focused on the cosmos. The oldest and most mysterious structures around the globe are not randomly situated. They are meticulously aligned with the movements of the sun, moon, and stars, forming a planetary network of observatories that encoded a complex understanding of celestial mechanics and cosmic time. This was not a primitive form of stargazing. It was a precise science, and its application in architecture suggests that the builders saw a fundamental connection between the heavens and the earth, a connection they sought to manifest in stone. The Great Pyramid of Giza serves as a primary example of this cosmic intention, a project where astronomy, mathematics, and geomancy converge. Its air shafts, once open to the sky, were precisely targeted with an accuracy that rules out chance. The northern shaft from the King's Chamber aligned with the pole star Alpha Draconis around 2600 BCE, while the southern shaft pointed directly to the center of Orion's belt, a constellation intimately linked with the Egyptian god Osiris. This stellar correlation is mirrored on the ground, where the layout of the three main pyramids at Giza replicates the pattern and relative brightness of the three stars of Orion's belt with remarkable fidelity. The encoding goes beyond simple alignment and enters the realm of advanced mathematics. The pyramid's base perimeter, divided by twice its height, yields a close approximation of the mathematical constant pi. The proportions of its structure, specifically the ratio of the apothem, the line from the apex to the midpoint of a base side, to half the base, also incorporate the golden ratio, or phi, a number that appears throughout nature and was thought to have been discovered by the Greeks millennia later. These are not accidental numerological occurrences, they are deliberate design features, embedding fundamental mathematical truths into the architecture. Some researchers, like Robert Bauval, have proposed that the Giza complex was a meridian in stone, a terrestrial map of the northern sky, with the Nile representing the Milky Way. The pyramid can thus be seen as a geodetic marker and a precessional clock, designed to track the slow, 26,000-year wobble of the Earth's axis. It was a machine for understanding time on a scale that dwarfs human lifetimes, suggesting its builders were thinking in terms of epochs, not generations. This celestial imperative is a universal language among the world's megalithic builders, a shared obsession that transcends geography and, apparently, time. In the arid plains of Wiltshire, England, Stonehenge stands as a massive stone computer for tracking solar and lunar cycles. Its construction spanned over 1,000 years, indicating a long-term, sustained dedication to astronomical observation that was passed down through countless generations. The site's axis is aligned to the summer solstice sunrise, with the heel stone marking the point where the sun crusts the horizon on the longest day of the year. But its complexity goes far deeper. The arrangement of the sarsen stones and the smaller blue stones creates alignments with the most northerly and southerly rising and setting points of the moon, events known as the major and minor lunar standstills, which occur on an 18.6-year cycle. To identify and encode this complex lunar cycle in architecture required centuries of meticulous record-keeping and a sophisticated understanding of geometry. The transportation of the bluestones from the Preseli Hills in Wales, over 150 miles away, further underscores the profound cultural and spiritual importance of this astronomical knowledge. Far across the Atlantic, the Maya of Central America developed this science to its highest degree of expression in the ancient world. The observatory at Chichen Itza, known as El Caracol, the snail for its spiral interior staircase, is a complex, windowed tower whose bizarre, non-radial sight lines were precisely engineered to track the cyclical movements of Venus. The Maya calculated the Venusian synodic period, the time it takes for Venus to return to the same point in the sky, to within a few hours over a 500-year period. This planet was of critical importance to their cosmology, associated with war and the god Kukulkan. Their long count calendar, a vast cycle of time that famously ended in 2012, was the product of millennia of precise astronomical recording, demonstrating a consciousness that conceived of history in grand, cyclical epochs rather than linear centuries. They understood concepts like the precession of the equinoxes and encoded them in their mythology and city planning. The Pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza itself becomes a celestial clock during the equinoxes, when the play of light and shadow creates the illusion of a serpent slithering down the northern staircase, a direct and dramatic connection between the earth and the sky. Perhaps the most profound evidence for the antiquity of this astronomical knowledge comes from a place that is now one of the most desolate on Earth, Nabta Playa in the Egyptian Sahara. Over 6,000 years ago, long before the pharaohs ruled, a community of nomadic pastoralists arranged a series of megaliths into a complex calendar that rivals the sophistication of much later sites. A central stone circle contains sightlines that align with the rising sun of the summer solstice. More astonishingly, the arrangement of other stones in the area appears to map the positions of the stars in Orion's belt as they would have appeared in the sky millennia ago. This site, a precursor to Stonehenge by 1,000 years, demonstrates that sophisticated astronomical knowledge was not the sole province of grand, urban civilizations. It was being practiced in deep antiquity by peoples we would label as pre-civilized. This suggests that the roots of this science are far older than we suppose, possibly extending back to a common, ancestral source that understood the heavens not as a backdrop for gods, but as a precise, measurable clockwork whose rhythms govern the world below. The global consistency of this practice, from the deserts of Egypt to the plains of England and the jungles of Central America, points to a fundamental human endeavor, but one that, in its most precise and monumental expressions, hints at a shared, inherited knowledge from a time when the line between the earthly and the celestial was known to be far thinner than we perceive it today. Beyond the grand scale of monuments and celestial alignments exists a more intimate and perplexing layer of evidence, the anomalous artifact. These objects, discovered in contexts that defy their presumed technological chronology, are like echoes from another time, suggesting flashes of advanced knowledge that flickered in the distant past, contradicting the smooth narrative of linear progress. They are the scattered pieces of a different history, one where the timeline of invention is not a straight line, but a complex web with lost threads of genius. Recovered from a Roman-era shipwreck off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera in 1901, the Antikythera mechanism spent decades as a corroded, calcified curiosity before advanced X-ray and CT imaging revealed its true nature in the early 21st century. This device, dating to the 2nd century BCE, is an intricate bronze gearwork assembly of stunning complexity. Containing at least 30 meshing gears, some with teeth cut at precise, non-uniform angles, it functioned as an analog computer capable of predicting astronomical positions, eclipses, and even the timing of the Olympic Games. It modeled the irregular orbit of the Moon using a differential gear, a mechanism whose next known appearance would be in the 16th century automobile. The device featured dials on the front and back, displaying the Metonic cycle, a 19-year lunar solar calendar, the Saros cycle, for predicting eclipses, and the Callipic cycle. The Antikythera mechanism is not a prototype. It is the pinnacle of a technical tradition. Its existence implies a lost history of high mechanics, a school of engineering and precision craftsmanship for which no other examples survive. Where are the design sketches, the tools used to cut its microscopic gear teeth, the simpler models that must have preceded it? It feels like a single, surviving relic from a library of advanced technology, the rest of which has been utterly lost to time, a ghost in the machine of Hellenistic history. From the depths of the Mediterranean to the plains of Mesopotamia, the puzzles continue, pointing to a diverse and unexpected technological landscape in antiquity. The Baghdad Battery, a simple terracotta jar from the Parthian era, 250 BCE, 250 CE, contained a copper cylinder and an iron rod, insulated with an asphalt stopper. When filled with an acidic electrolyte like vinegar or grape juice, it produces a small electric current of about 1 to 2 volts. While its purpose remains enigmatic, plausible theories extend beyond mere speculation. It could have been used for electroplating, to deposit a thin layer of gold or silver onto objects, a process that requires only a low-voltage current. Alternatively, it may have had a medical application, using the mild electric shock for pain relief or muscular stimulation, a practice known in the ancient world using electric fish. Even a religious or mystical purpose, creating a mysterious tingling sensation for priests or initiates, is possible. Its existence, in any case, demonstrates a practical, if rudimentary, grasp of electrochemical principles over a millennium before such concepts were formally understood in the West. In Egypt, the bas-relief carvings within the crypt of the Hathor Temple at Dendera depict objects that bear a striking resemblance to large, modern light bulbs. The depiction shows a translucent, pear-shaped vessel with a snake-like filament winding through its center, connected by a cable to a box upon which a kneeling god rests. The entire ensemble is held aloft by a pillar, which could be interpreted as an insulator. Orthodox Egyptology interprets these as symbolic representations of a lotus flower spawning a snake, part of the creation myth involving the god Harsamtis. Yet, the visual parallel to electrical apparatus is so compelling and detailed that it has fueled persistent speculation about the application of advanced energy technology, perhaps based on different principles than our own, in the ancient world. The anomalies extend into the realm of materials science and craftsmanship, revealing lost peaks of technical achievement. The Viking Ooparts swords, wielded between the 9th and 11th centuries, were forged from a steel of unparalleled purity. This was crucible steel, a material virtually free of the slide inclusions that weakened contemporary European weapons. To create it, raw iron and carbon had to be melted together in a sealed clay crucible at temperatures exceeding 1,300 degrees Celsius, a process that homogenized the steel and resulted in a metal that was stronger, sharper, and more flexible than anything else in Europe at the time. The technology to achieve and sustain such high temperatures, and the knowledge of the exact carbon content required, was not thought to exist in Europe until the Industrial Revolution, some 800 years later. The source of this knowledge and the raw material remains one of archaeology's enduring mysteries. Some theories suggest the raw steel ingots were imported via the Volga trade routes from the Middle East or Central Asia, where crucible steel was known, but the Ooparts brand and the consistent high quality point to a highly secretive and skilled metallurgical tradition operating in the Frankish realm, a tradition that was centuries ahead of its time and was eventually lost. Even the famous Piri-Reis map of 1513, which we have discussed, can be considered an Oopart of cartography, preserving a knowledge of geography that should have been impossible for its time. But other cartographic mysteries exist. The Vinland map, though controversial and suspected by many to be a forgery, purported to show parts of North America decades before Columbus. The Dulcer Portolan chart of 1339 shows an astonishingly accurate depiction of Europe and North Africa, with a precision of longitude that should have been impossible before the invention of the marine chronometer in the 18th century. These maps, along with artifacts like the Koso artifact, a spark plug found encased in a geode claimed to be millions of years old, or the London hammer found in Cretaceous rock, form a constellation of unexplained data points. While each can be individually debated, dismissed as an anomaly, misdated, or labeled a hoax, their collective presence is significant. They suggest that the path of human knowledge has not been a straight, upward line. Instead, it appears to be a series of peaks and troughs, where advanced understanding in specific fields, mechanics, energy, metallurgy, navigation, could arise, flourish in isolation, and then be lost, perhaps in a cataclysm, perhaps through the slow erosion of time and the breakdown of the societies that nurtured them. They are the tangible ghosts of a past that was more intellectually dynamic and technologically diverse than our history books allow, hinting that our current civilization may not be the first to gaze at the stars and seek to harness the hidden forces of the natural world. They remind us that knowledge is fragile, and that the light of discovery can be extinguished, leaving behind only enigmatic shadows for future generations to ponder. As we conclude this part of our journey into the architecture and artifacts of the ancients, we like to extend a special thank you for listening. If you're finding comfort in these explorations of deep time, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Slumber Expeditions. We would also love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us where you are listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to connect with our global community of curious minds. You can also share which part of the story has captivated you the most so far. It would be wonderful to start a conversation around it. Now, let the profound implications of these ancient marvels settle in your mind as we prepare to conclude our exploration. The most compelling argument for a lost civilization is not merely the presence of its potential ruins, but the terrifyingly consistent global evidence for its sudden and violent demise. The theory posits that a cataclysm of unimaginable scale, a true planetary reset event, scoured the Earth, sinking continents, shifting poles, and plunging the world into a long, dark winter. This is not the stuff of myth. It is a scenario written in the geological record and encoded in the collective trauma of humanity's oldest stories. To comprehend the scale of this event is to understand that the world we inhabit is a palimpsest, a parchment on which an earlier text was violently erased, leaving only faint, tantalizing traces beneath the surface of our current reality. The most prominent scientific hypothesis for this event is the Younger Dryas impact theory. Around 12,800 years ago, just as the last ice age was receding and the climate was warming, creating new, fertile landscapes for humanity to expand into, something catastrophic happened. The geological layer from this time, known as the Younger Dryas boundary, contains a cocktail of evidence that points to an extraterrestrial trigger. Found across more than 50 sites on 4 continents, from North America to Europe and into the Middle East, this thin, dark layer is a forensic snapshot of a global disaster. It is rich in nanodiamonds, microscopic diamonds formed under immense pressure and heat, such as that from an impact or aerial explosion. It also contains elevated levels of iridium and platinum, elements rare on Earth's surface, but common in asteroids and comets. There are magnetic microspherules and shocked quartz, tiny balls of melted rock and crystals deformed by immense shockwaves. Layers of soot and charcoal indicate continent-spanning wildfires that would have raged across millions of square miles, consuming forests and any settlements in their path. The most striking evidence is the presence of melt glass, a material that forms when sand, rock, and soil are instantly vaporized and refused at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, a phenomenon associated with aerial explosions like the Tunguska event but on a continental scale. The theory suggests that a fragmented comet, perhaps 100 kilometers in diameter, entering the Earth's atmosphere at a shallow angle, exploded in a series of titanic airbursts over the northern hemisphere, with the most significant impacts likely centered over the North American ice sheet. The immediate effects would have been thermal pulses of unimaginable intensity, creating firestorms that incinerated everything in their path, followed by an impact winter, where the dust, soot, and aerosols thrown into the stratosphere blocked the sun's rays for years, causing global temperatures to plummet back to near-glacial conditions for a 1,300-year period known as the Younger Dryas stadial. This was not a gradual cooling, it was a climate switch being thrown, a planetary deep freeze triggered in a geological instant. The climatic and geological consequences of such an event would have been apocalyptic, reshaping the very face of the planet. The sudden cooling would have killed off vegetation and the megafauna that depended on it, leading to the well-documented and abrupt extinction of woolly mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, and giant sloths across North America. But the most devastating impact, particularly for any coastal civilization, would have been on the ice. The North American continent was covered by the Laurentide ice sheet, a miles-thick mass of ice containing a significant portion of the world's freshwater. The thermal shock and the physical force of the impacts could have triggered a catastrophic destabilization of this ice sheet. The result would have been a rapid, massive discharge of cold freshwater into the North Atlantic Ocean. This sudden influx is hypothesized to have shut down the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, AMOC, the great ocean conveyor belt that brings warm tropical waters northward, moderating Europe's climate. This explains the paradoxical deep freeze of the Younger Dryas, a period of intense cold in the midst of a warming trend. Furthermore, the collapse of ice sheets would have led to a dramatic and rapid rise in sea levels. While the total melt occurred over centuries, there is strong evidence for meltwater pulses, periods where sea levels rose by dozens of feet in a matter of decades or even years. Meltwater Pulse 1A, around 14,500 years ago, saw sea levels rise by over 65 feet in less than 500 years. For any human civilization existing on the vast, low-lying coastal plains that were exposed during the Ice Age, places like Doggerland, Sunderland, and the Bering Land Bridge, this would have been a relentless, inescapable doom. Their homelands, which had been stable for millennia, would have been swallowed by the sea within a few generations, their world literally dissolving around them. The coastline would have retreated visibly, mile upon mile, within a single human lifetime, forcing mass migrations and creating a permanent, traumatic memory of a lost world. This geological cataclysm is precisely mirrored in the global tapestry of human myth, providing a narrative framework for the physical evidence. The universal flood narrative, found in over 500 cultures, is the most obvious parallel. But the stories often contain details that go beyond simple flooding and align eerily with the impact hypothesis. The Popol Vuh of the Maya speaks of a world destroyed by a resin shower from the sky, a possible description of a cometary debris field, followed by a great darkness and then a deluge. The Phaeton myth of the Greeks tells of the son of Helios who lost control of the sun chariot, flying too close to the earth and scorching it, forcing Zeus to strike him down with a thunderbolt to save the world, a potent allegory for a comet's fiery passage and fragmentation. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia have fire from the sky, myths that describe a time when the stars fell to earth, causing great fires and a time of darkness. The ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead and the pyramid texts contain references to a time of chaos, when the sky was low and the earth was turned upside down, and the sun god regrew weary of humanity and sent his eye in the form of a goddess, Sekhmet, to destroy them, a story of divine wrath that could be a memory of the impact winter and the ensuing pandemonium. These are not stories of a slow climate change. They are stories of a single, terrifying event, a world set on fire, a sky that fell, a sun that grew dim, and then a great flood. The Cataclysm hypothesis provides a plausible, physical basis for these shared memories. The cometary airbursts explain the fire from the sky. The impact winter explains the global darkness and cooling. The meltwater pulses and the collapse of glacial dams explain the worldwide flood myths. The evidence suggests that humanity did not simply evolve out of the Ice Age. It survived a planetary near-death experience, an event that wiped the slate clean and forced the survivors to begin again, carrying with them only the trauma and the fragmented knowledge of the world that was. The Cataclysm was not just a geological event. It was the formative psychological event of the human species, the great divorce between the world that was and the world that is. In the aftermath of a global cataclysm, the survivors would have been left with two profound legacies: the shattered remnants of a more advanced culture, and the desperate need to explain what had happened. The theory of a lost civilization posits that the memory of this culture and its catastrophic end was woven into the very fabric of human mythology, transforming history into legend, master builders into gods, and advanced technology into magic. These stories are not mere fanciful creations. They are the deep-seated cultural memories of a real, historical trauma and the people who define the world before the fall. Consider the universal figure of the civilizing god or culture hero. Across the world, myths speak of bearded, wise beings who arrived after a great flood or a period of chaos to teach humanity the arts of civilization. In Sumer, it was Oannes, the Apkallu, a being described as part man, part fish, who emerged from the Erythraean Sea to teach the Sumerians writing, agriculture, law, and architecture. The descriptions are remarkably consistent. He had the body of a fish, but underneath, the form of a man. He would spend the day with men, teaching them, but would return to the sea at night. He was one of 7 such sages. In Mesoamerica, it was the pale-skinned, bearded Quetzalcoatl, or Kukulkan, the feathered serpent god, who brought the knowledge of maize, calendars, mathematics, and crafts. He was a peaceful god, opposed to human sacrifice, and his departure was prophesied with a promise to return. In the Andes, it was Viracocha, a tall, bearded man in a long white robe who strode across the land after a great flood, commanding the stones to become people and teaching them the skills of society, the arts, and language before walking away across the Pacific Ocean. In Egypt, it was Osiris, who is said to have traveled the world after establishing his rule in Egypt, bringing agriculture, viniculture, and laws to a barbaric humanity before being betrayed and dismembered by his brother Set. The consistency is remarkable. A non-human or semi-divine being, often associated with water or serpents, arrives post-Cataclysm to restart civilization. Could these figures be the mythologized memories of the survivors of the lost civilization? Individuals or groups who possessed the salvaged knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, medicine, and engineering, and who used it to guide the shell-shocked, post-apocalyptic hunter-gatherers toward a new, settled way of life? Their divine status would have been a natural conclusion for primitive peoples witnessing their advanced skills, which would have seemed like magic. Their association with water could be a memory of their arrival from across the sea, or from the drowned lands. Their eventual departure or death could symbolize the eventual fading of their direct influence, as their knowledge was absorbed, diluted, and sometimes corrupted by the emerging new cultures. Alongside the civilizing gods are the ubiquitous legends of giants, which permeate the folklore of nearly every culture on Earth. The Bible speaks of the Nephilim, the sons of God who lay with the daughters of men, producing a race of giants in those days and also after that. The Greeks had the Titans, a race of powerful, primordial deities, and the Cyclopes, giant one-eyed beings who were master smiths. The Norse had the Jotun, colossal beings of great strength and wisdom who existed before the gods and who represented the chaotic forces of nature. Native American tribes, from the Paiute of the Great Basin, who have a detailed oral history of red-haired giants called the Cetaceh, to the Iroquois of the Northeast, have rich traditions of battling and coexisting with races of giants. While often dismissed as pure fantasy or symbolic representations of natural forces, these stories take on a new light when viewed through the lens of a lost civilization. The massive Cyclopean masonry found at sites like Sacsayhuaman, Baalbek, or Giza is often attributed in local folklore to giants, or to a race of master builders with supernatural strength. The giants may not have been literal giants of flesh and blood, but a metaphorical representation of the people who built the colossal structures that the later, smaller-statured peoples found amidst their landscapes, structures so immense and perfectly made they could only be explained by the work of beings of unimaginable power and stature. The legends of their destruction by gods or floods could be the folk memory of the actual cataclysm that wiped their culture out. In this view, the global myth of a war between the gods and the giants is the memory of the cataclysmic natural forces that destroyed the world of the giants, the advanced civilization, paving the way for the age of the gods, the deified survivors, and modern humanity. Then there are the specific, detailed legends of sunken kingdoms and lost continents, which form the most direct narrative link to the concept of a drowned civilization. Plato's account of Atlantis in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias is the most famous, a highly detailed description of a powerful, technologically advanced island nation beyond the Pillars of Hercules that fought a war with ancient Athens and sank beneath the ocean in a single day and night of misfortune. Plato provides a wealth of specific details: the concentric rings of water and land, the vast plain, the sophisticated canal system, the mysterious metal orichalcum, and the advanced architecture. But Atlantis is just one of many. In India, the ancient Sanskrit texts describe the seven netherworlds and specifically the kingdom of Tripura, three magnificent flying cities made of gold, silver, and iron that were destroyed by a single arrow from the god Shiva. The ancient Tamil legends of Kumari Kandam tell of a vast continent that once connected India to Madagascar and Australia, a land of advanced learning, culture, and the original Tamil language that was lost to the sea in a series of catastrophic floods. The Welsh and Celtic myths speak of the sunken kingdom of Cantor Gweled, a fertile, low-lying land protected by a dike, whose drunken gatekeeper, Seithanan, neglected his duty, allowing the waters to rush in and drown the land forever. The Haida and other Pacific Northwest tribes tell of ancient villages on the now submerged continental shelf and of a time when the sea levels were much lower. These are not vague stories of a flood. They are specific accounts of lost lands with names, kings, cities, and often a moral lesson about hubris or negligence. While their historicity is fiercely debated, their persistence across disparate cultures is a powerful testament to a deeply ingrained human memory of a world that was lost to the ocean. The rising sea levels at the end of the Ice Age provide the perfect mechanism for these losses. The myth of Atlantis may be a garbled memory of a sophisticated, island-based culture in the Mediterranean, the Azores Plateau, or even Antarctica that was wiped out by the meltwater pulses. The collective lore of gods, giants, and sunken kingdoms forms a coherent, if mythologized, narrative that perfectly complements the geological and archaeological evidence, a great and powerful culture, a cataclysmic destruction by water and fire, and the legacy of its knowledge carried by a handful of survivors who are remembered as gods, while their immense works were attributed to giants. Our myths are not just stories. They are the long echo of a real history, a history that ended under the waves. To truly consider the possibility that we are not the first advanced civilization on Earth is to undertake a profound philosophical and psychological shift. It forces us to reevaluate the nature of progress, the fragility of knowledge, and our own place in the deep time of our planet. The implications ripple outwards, touching our understanding of history, our approach to archaeology, and our responsibility for the future. Accepting this premise is not an endpoint, but a new beginning for how we see ourselves and our destiny. The most immediate implication is the complete and radical overhaul of the traditional cradle of civilization model that has been taught for over a century. The standard narrative, which places the dawn of complex society in the river valleys of Sumer and Egypt around 4000 BCE, would be revealed as merely the second dawn, or perhaps the third or fourth. The true cradle, the source of the original cultural and technological spark, would lie millennia earlier, its location now likely submerged on the continental shelves of our world. This would mean that the sudden, seemingly miraculous appearance of Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and the Norte Chico with fully formed systems of writing, mathematics, astronomy, and social hierarchy would no longer be an archaeological mystery, but the logical outcome of a long, hidden period of development that was catastrophically interrupted and then restarted by refugee populations. The achievements of these known ancient civilizations would be seen not as miraculous beginnings born from nothing, but as a brilliant, if diminished, echo of a prior age's glory. This perspective elegantly resolves many of the anomalies that plague mainstream archaeology. The breathtaking precision of the Giza pyramids is no longer an outlier, it is a legacy project. The sophisticated astronomy at Nabta Playa, dating to 6000 BCE, is not an inexplicable precocity, it is a surviving thread of a much older tapestry of knowledge. The independent yet simultaneous rise of complex societies becomes less coincidental, more easily explained by the dispersal of a common, ancestral culture from a now-lost center. This new paradigm does not diminish the accomplishments of the ancient Egyptians or Sumerians. Rather, it provides them with a much deeper and more sophisticated foundation, explaining their brilliance as an inheritance, not a spontaneous generation. This new paradigm demands a radical and urgent shift in the focus of archaeological and geological exploration. For the past 2 centuries, archaeology has been a predominantly terrestrial pursuit. If the theory of a lost civilization is merit, then the most promising sites for uncovering definitive evidence are not on land, but under dozens, even hundreds, of feet of water. The search must concentrate with renewed vigor on the now submerged coastlines that were above water during the last glacial maximum. This includes the Persian Gulf, which was a fertile river valley until it was flooded around 8000 BCE, the Sunda Shelf, the vast continent that connected Indonesia, the Sahel Shelf, connecting Australia and New Guinea, the Bering Land Bridge, and the North Sea, specifically the area known as Doggerland. This is a monumental technical and financial challenge, requiring a global commitment on the scale of the space race or the Large Hadron Collider project. It would involve advanced marine archaeology, side-scan sonar, subsea floor penetrating radar, and autonomous underwater vehicles capable of mapping and sampling the ocean floor in unprecedented detail. The goal would not be to find intact, gleaming cities. The destructive power of rising seas, currents, and millennia of sedimentation is too great for that. The discoveries would be more subtle but no less revolutionary. Foundational stone structures, artificial harbors, sophisticated stone tools in stratified underwater layers, and perhaps the most valuable find of all, a sealed, underwater repository, a time capsule from the world before the flood, preserved in an anoxic environment. The very act of launching such a search would be a monumental admission that our history is profoundly incomplete and that the keys to understanding our origins and the full potential of the human story lie in the one place we have yet to fully explore, the deep ocean floor, the silent custodian of our deepest past. Finally, and most importantly, the theory of a lost civilization carries a sobering and urgent warning for our own time, a lesson etched in stone and preserved in myth. If an advanced human culture did indeed flourish for thousands of years and then perish in a global cataclysm, it demonstrates with terrifying clarity that civilization is not a permanent, inevitable state. It is a fragile, fleeting phenomenon, a delicate flicker of light vulnerable to being snuffed out by planetary scale shocks. The evidence strongly suggests that the end for this predecessor came not from within, through internal war, social decay, or resource depletion, but from without, via a random, indifferent cosmic event. This dramatically reframes our current global challenges and priorities. While we rightly focus on terrestrial, self-inflicted threats like climate change, nuclear war, and pandemic disease, the story of a lost civilization compels us to expand our vision to include existential risks from space. The development of robust planetary defense systems, such as those designed to detect, track, and deflect near-Earth asteroids and comets, becomes not a scientific luxury or a plot for a science fiction film, but a fundamental, non-negotiable act of species survival. It is a lesson that, according to this theory, was learned in the most brutal way possible by a civilization that came before us. The story of a lost civilization teaches us the humility of deep time. We are not the pinnacle of history, but merely its current occupants, living our brief moment in the sun. The ruins we puzzle over today, the pyramids, the megaliths, the precise maps, may one day be the enigmatic monuments that a future species, rising from the ashes of our own potential collapse, will gaze upon with the same mixture of awe, confusion, and longing that we feel today. The ultimate lesson of the Silent Earth is that knowledge is our only true legacy, and its preservation against the indifferent, chaotic forces of the cosmos is the greatest challenge and responsibility of any civilization, whether it is the first or simply the latest in a long and cyclical story. We have reached the end of our slumber expedition for this evening. Thank you for joining us on this profound journey to the edges of history and myth. May the quiet mystery of our planet's deep past linger with you, a gentle reminder of the vast, forgotten chapters in the great story of life on Earth.